I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Just picture a massive, modern, multinational corporation.
Okay.
Like think of a giant tech company, or maybe that colossal online retailer where you buy your groceries, your electronics, basically everything you need to survive.
Right, the ones that are just everywhere.
Exactly. Now imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, you check the news, and this company has announced a slight pivot in its business model.
A pivot, right.
Yeah. They aren't just selling you things anymore. They've decided to take over the collection of your income tax.
Oh, wow.
And, just to make sure the transition goes smoothly, they've deployed their own private standing army to your city to enforce compliance.
I mean, it's a completely absurd thought experiment for us today, right?
Yeah, totally.
The global economy would immediately gridlock. Modern governments would be in an absolute unprecedented panic over the collapse of state sovereignty.
The immediate question would be like, how on earth does a government react to a corporation deciding to play empire?
Right, which is exactly what we're talking about today.
Exactly. Well, today's mission is to explore the ultimate historical precedent for exactly that kind of corporate overreach. We are taking a deep dive into the history of the British East India Company.
Specifically between 1773 and 1858.
Yes. Our goal for you today is to unpack a mind-boggling transformation.
Yeah.
We are looking at how a private trading company accidentally became an empire.
And crucially, how a terrified British government spent 85 years slowly, painstakingly tightening the leash around its neck.
It is wild.
It really is. And to really grasp this, we have to look past the timeline of dates. We are going to look at the ground level mechanics of power.
Right.
We want to understand what actually happens to the architecture of regulation when the profit motive collides head-on with the responsibilities of a sovereign state.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand how the British government tried to fix this mess, we have to understand the sheer scale of the chaos that forced them to intervene.
Oh, the chaos was massive.
Right, like how does a company even get to the point where it needs a national leash?
Well, it starts quite modestly, actually. In the year 1600, a group of London merchants basically pool their capital.
Okay.
And they secure a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I. Their objective is entirely commercial.
They just want to make money.
Exactly. They want to sail to the East Indies, and they want to trade in spices and silk. And for over a century and a half, that is exactly what they do.
Just buying and selling.
Right. They are merchants operating out of coastal trading posts in India.
Right, so they are building warehouses, not parliaments. But something radically shifts. Like, how do we go from importing nutmeg to ruling millions of people?
Yeah, so the critical pivot happens in 1765. This is following a major conflict called the Battle of Buxar.
Okay.
The East India Company had been, gradually building up a private security force to protect its trading posts.
Makes sense. You want to guard your warehouses.
Right. But eventually that security force gets pulled into regional conflicts, and they win a decisive military victory. Wow.
And as the victor, the company secures something called the Diwani from the Mughal emperor.
Okay, wait, let's break down that term, because the Diwani seems to be the engine of this whole crisis.
It absolutely is.
What does acquiring it actually look like on the ground?
So, the Diwani is the legal right to collect the revenue, the taxes, in the incredibly wealthy provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
That is massive.
It is. Practically overnight, this merchant company is handed the keys to the treasury of an area larger than Britain itself.
So they've pivoted from an import-export business to, privatized tax farming.
Exactly.
But here is the terrifying part. They kept the exact same corporate structure.
Right. Nothing changed at the top.
There was no sudden influx of civil rights lawyers or government oversight. It's just a board of directors in London demanding high returns.
And their employees in India realizing they now control the local GDP.
It's like a startup that pivoted from e-commerce to a hostile military takeover, but kept the same lack of corporate oversight. That is exactly what it was. And what's fascinating here is that this single tension defines the entire 85-year period we are discussing.
The tension between profit and governing.
Yes. You have a corporation wielding state power, but who are they answering to? Only to their shareholders.
Right.
There is absolutely no legal framework dictating how they should govern a massive civilian population. Their mandate is to maximize dividends, not to protect citizens.
I mean, the results were catastrophic. You have company officials going to India, abusing this unchecked power, and returning to Britain with staggering, ungodly amounts of wealth.
Oh, absolutely.
The British public was actually disgusted by them. They mockingly called them nabobs, which was like a corruption of the title Nawab.
Yeah, they were very unpopular back home.
But it wasn't just corporate embezzlement, right? It was a profound human tragedy.
It was. We have to look at the Bengal famine of 1770.
Yeah, this is so dark.
It was a devastating natural disaster, but it was heavily compounded by corporate policy. It ended up killing an estimated 1/3 of the population of Bengal.
1/3. That is just, it's hard to even process.
And a functional government facing a famine of that scale would typically suspend tax collection, provide relief, and distribute grain.
But the East India Company didn't do that.
No, not at all. They coldly continued to strictly enforce tax collection.
Unbelievable.
And in some cases, they even increased rates just to ensure their shareholder dividends wouldn't dip. They were functioning as a business, not a state.
It's chilling.
So,
millions are starving. Company men are returning home with mansions and diamonds, and this is the breaking point.
right.
The British Parliament realizes they can no longer look away. But wait, if the British state sees this private company causing a humanitarian and geopolitical disaster, why not just revoke their charter right then and there?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. Why not just seize the territory?
Because the company had become the 18th century definition of too big to fail.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the British government actually relied heavily on the East India Company for short-term loans. The company's stock was a pillar of the British financial system.
Oh, wow. So they were financially trapped.
Completely. Parliament couldn't just destroy them without crashing their own economy. So instead of a takeover, they attempt a hostile regulation.
Which brings us to the first attempt to fix the unfixable.
Yes. The Regulating Act of 1773. This is monumental because it represents the very first step the British government takes to insert itself into the company's affairs.
Okay, so what does that first draft of regulation actually look like? Are they sending government officials over to India?
They attempt to centralize and oversee the power. The act takes the company's top official in the region and elevates him, creating the new office of the Governor-General of Bengal.
Okay.
Warren Hastings is the first to hold this title. And to ensure he doesn't act like a dictator, Parliament gives him an executive council of 4 members to assist in decision-making.
Okay, so a built-in system of checks and balances.
Exactly. They also make the previously independent company settlements of Bombay and Madras subordinate to Bengal.
Trying to create one unified chain of command, I guess.
Right. Furthermore, to crack down on the rampant corruption, the Act strictly bars company servants from engaging in private trade or accepting bribes.
Which was a huge problem.
Huge. And they also set up a new Supreme Court at Calcutta.
Now, on paper, I can see what Parliament is trying to do. They're trying to staple a functioning government bureaucracy onto a private company.
Yeah, staple is a good word for it.
But digging into the mechanics of this,
Mm-hmm.
the 1773 Act seems like a complete disaster.
Oh, it was a profound failure on its own terms. Let's look at that executive council you mentioned. The Governor-General did not have veto power.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so if 3 of his 4 council members disagreed with him, he was overruled.
So they essentially gave him a corporate board that could just vote him out of his own policies.
Basically,
You're
yeah.
trying to govern a massive, volatile territory, and your executive is paralyzed by office politics.
Precisely. And then there was the new Supreme Court. The law left the court's jurisdiction incredibly vague.
Vague how?
Well, almost immediately, the British judges of the Supreme Court began clashing violently with the company's administration. Like, if a company tax collector commits a crime, who tries him?
Oh, I see.
Is it the company or the Crown's new court? The legislation didn't clearly say.
It's a jurisdictional nightmare. You have a paralyzed executive, a rogue court, and a company still trying to turn a profit.
Yeah, it was a mess.
So Parliament realizes they need version 2.0. They need to structurally separate the profit motive from the governance.
Which leads to Pitt's India Act in 1784. This was spearheaded by Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger.
Right.
Parliament finally recognized the fundamental flaw. You cannot have the same people managing the buying of silk and the deploying of armies. The 2 functions had to be separated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because their solution is this fascinating system of double government or dual control.
Right.
Functionally, how did that actually work?
Under dual control, the company's commercial functions, so the shipping, the warehouses, the buying and selling of goods, those were left entirely with the company's court of directors.
Okay.
But every single political, civil, and military function was stripped from them.
Just totally taken away.
Yep. and placed under a newly created body called the Board of Control. This board sat in London and was directly appointed by the British state.
I'm trying to picture the sheer awkwardness of this arrangement. It's like a massive public-private partnership where the government regulator holds total veto power over the geopolitical strategy.
Right.
But the corporate CEO is still running the ground operations and paying the staff. You have two completely different bosses trying to steer the exact same ship.
It was incredibly cumbersome, especially with an 18th century communication delay where a letter took 6 months to reach India.
Oh, man.
But historically, this is the massive shift. Pitt's Act introduced two major precedents. First, it legally referred to the company's territories as the British possessions in India.
The mask slips. They aren't corporate assets anymore. They are explicitly property of the crown.
Exactly. And second, the British government officially had its hands firmly on the steering wheel of civil and military administration.
The company was still in the vehicle, but they were no longer choosing the destination.
That's a perfect way to put it.
This sets up a fascinating dynamic. Once this dual control is established, Parliament doesn't just walk away.
No, they don't.
They institute what are essentially 20-year performance reviews. Every 2 decades, the East India Company's royal charter expires and has to be officially renewed by the government.
And this is where we see the leash methodically tighten. Parliament uses every single one of these 20-year checkups to systematically dismantle the company's original reason for existing.
Right. So the first of these, the Charter Act of 1793, doesn't radically change the game, but it does force the Board of Control, the government regulators, to be paid out of the revenues collected in India rather than by British taxpayers.
Yeah, shifting the financial burden.
But the real earthquake hits during the next checkup, the Charter Act of 1813.
The 1813 Act is a monumental shift in the timeline.
Huge.
To understand why, you have to understand that the East India Company was born in 1600 as a monopoly. Their entire business model relied on being the only British entity legally allowed to trade in the East.
And the 1813 Act completely destroys that.
It does. Parliament just strips the monopoly away and opens the Indian trade to all British merchants.
The company is only allowed to keep their monopoly on the tea trade and their trade with China, right?
Correct.
But why would the government suddenly kneecap their own cash cow like that?
Well, ideology and economics had shifted. The Industrial Revolution is taking off in Britain, and there is a massive push for free trade.
Oh, that makes sense.
Furthermore, Parliament realizes the absurdity of the situation. How can a sovereign ruler, which the company essentially was in India, shut out its own citizens from trading in its territory? So they break the monopoly.
But the 1813 Act did something else that I found really striking. It legally forced the East India Company to set aside 1 lakh rupees, which is about 100,000 rupees every single year, specifically for the education of Indians.
Yes, that was a huge addition.
Now, I have to push back on this.
Okay, go ahead.
Was forcing a massive corporation to fund local education a genuine philanthropic awakening by the British state? Or was this just a calculated PR move?
The PR angle.
I mean, we see this today, right?
Yeah.
A company facing massive regulatory scrutiny suddenly launches a highly publicized, relatively cheap, charitable initiative to justify their continued profitable existence to critics back home.
It's a very sharp parallel, actually. Historians certainly debate the underlying intent.
Right.
Was it a genuine moral imperative championed by reformers or a cynical justification for empire? But regardless of the intent behind it, the functional reality of that clause is what matters for our timeline.
How so?
Well, this raises an important question. Regarding the company's shifting identity, by legally requiring the company to fund public education, Parliament is fundamentally altering the corporate DNA.
Right, because businesses buy inventory, governments build schools.
Exactly. If they no longer hold a monopoly on trade and they are now legally mandated to administer social welfare programs, what is their actual purpose?
They are forced into a new role.
Yes. The 1813 Act forcefully accelerates their transition. The merchant is being hollowed out to make room for the administrator.
Which brings us to the final phase of this incredibly slow transformation. The next 20-year checkup is the Charter Act of 1833.
Yes.
And if 1813 was the beginning of the end for the trading company, 1833 is the total annihilation of it.
The Charter Act of 1833 is the ultimate centralizing mechanism in British India. Everything converges here.
Okay, walk us through it.
Let's look at the executive power. That office of the Governor-General of Bengal, it is elevated to the Governor-General of India. Lord William Bentinck is the first to hold it.
And it's not just a fancy new title, right? They are stripping away the last remaining pockets of regional autonomy.
Completely. The local governments of Bombay and Madras lose whatever legislative powers they still possessed.
Wow.
The Governor General of India now holds sole lawmaking authority for the entire territorial expanse.
But the detail that absolutely fascinated me about the 1833 Act is what it did to the company's ledger books.
Oh, yes.
It ended the East India Company's commercial activities altogether, full stop.
Yeah.
The tea trade, the China trade, everything. They were legally forbidden from doing business.
Think about the immense paradox of that.
It's crazy.
The merchants who set sail in 1600 to import spices are now legally barred from importing or exporting anything at all.
Yeah.
The East India Company is a corporation with no products, no inventory, and no trade routes. They exist solely as an administrative show.
So how do they pay their shareholders?
Through the taxes they collect from the Indian populace, they have become a privatized wing of the British government.
It is such a bizarre concept. They even include this clause in 1833, a promise that no Indian would be denied employment under the company based on religion, birth, descent, or color.
Yes, the non-discrimination clause.
Now, the reality on the ground was that this noble promise was rarely honored. It was mostly lip service.
Unfortunately, yes.
But the sheer fact that a corporation felt compelled to draft what is essentially a constitutional guarantee of equal rights shows how far they had mutated.
Right.
Corporations write HR policies, nations write constitutional guarantees.
Which leads perfectly into the final legislative act in our period, the Charter Act of 1853.
Okay.
This act doesn't try to change the company's purpose because the purpose is now settled. They are the state.
So what does it do?
Instead, 1853 focuses on modernizing the sprawling bureaucratic apparatus they've built.
This is the last checkup before the wheels fall off entirely. What does Parliament do to the machinery of government here?
For the first time, it formally separates the legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council.
So the people debating and making the rules are finally in a different room than the people enforcing the rules.
Yes. It essentially creates a mini-parliament, which became known as the Indian Legislative Council.
Okay.
It functioned almost like a smaller version of the British Parliament, establishing dedicated legislative machinery.
That's a huge shift.
Furthermore, in a massive blow to the old corporate nepotism, it stripped the company's directors of their right to hand out lucrative jobs to their friends and nephews.
Oh, nice. They introduced an open competition system for the civil service, right?
Correct. The civil service was now to be filled through competitive examinations, theoretically open to everyone, including Indians. The administration was professionalizing.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and trace this entire 85-year arc, because the sheer scale of the transformation is staggering to me.
It really is.
In 1773, you have a rogue trading firm causing famines, and a panicked government hands them a deeply flawed set of rules just to slow the bleeding. By 1784, the government splits the power in half because profit and politics are clashing.
Yep.
By 1813, they strip away the company's monopoly. By 1833, they legally ban the company from trading altogether.
The evolution is crazy.
And by 1853, this entity, which still bizarrely calls itself the East India Company, sells absolutely nothing. It just has a mini-parliament, a massive standing army, and an exam-based HR department for civil servants.
The merchant has entirely evaporated, leaving only the bureaucracy behind.
Wow.
It is a slow-motion corporate death, orchestrated by a government too afraid to pull the plug all at once. And the stage is perfectly set for the finale.
Right, because it doesn't last forever.
No. Just 4 years after that 1853 act, the Great Revolt of 1857 would sweep across the subcontinent.
Yeah.
That uprising would finally shatter the illusion of the company entirely, forcing the British crown to step out from behind the curtain and rule India directly.
It really is a phenomenal 85-year case study. But, we have to connect this back to why this history matters to you, sitting here today listening to this.
Absolutely.
Like, why spend time unpacking the jurisdictional disputes of 18th century British law? Well, because this story vividly illustrates the monumental, almost impossible difficulty of regulating a private entity once it achieves the scale of a sovereign state.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale about the velocity of corporate expansion versus the speed of government regulation.
Exactly.
The East India Company's transformation from a profit-driven merchant to a tightly controlled sovereign administrator required 85 years of gradual, messy, trial-and-error legislation.
That took so long.
Those 20-year checkups were the only way Parliament could digest the problem.
And that timeline feels like a luxury we don't have anymore.
Exactly. It leaves us with a critical and frankly unsettling question to mull over. What happens today if a multinational tech corporation achieves a similar level of global power?
Oh, man.
We aren't talking about trade routes and spices anymore. What if a single entity gains absolute control over the world's digital infrastructure, our global communication grids, or our economic data?
The new Diwani.
Precisely. If that happens, would modern governments be able to steadily tighten the leash over 85 years, as Parliament did? Or is the sheer speed of today's digital world simply too fast for the slow, methodical, legislative checkups of the past?
It's a terrifying thought. By the time a modern parliament even drafted the first version of the Regulating Act, the corporation might have already updated its terms of service to include your local municipality.
Seriously?
Next time you click Buy Now on your phone, just take a moment to be incredibly glad that the package arriving at your door is just a pair of headphones and not a corporate tax collector backed by a standing army.
Imagine you've just survived, like a massive empire-shaking earthquake.
Oh, wow.
I mean, metaphorically speaking. It's 1857, and a huge revolt across India has just shattered the illusion that a mere merchant company, the East India Company, can govern an entire subcontinent.
Right, it was a massive wake-up call.
Exactly. So we're looking at a really fascinating stack of sources today. Historical texts, colonial legal documents, and structural analyses spanning from 1858 all the way to 1947.
Yeah.
And our mission as we dig through these texts is to answer one big question. Were the century of British legal reforms that followed acts of, colonial generosity, like slowly teaching a nation to govern itself?
Or were they just desperate concessions wrung from a reluctant empire under intense pressure?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because when the dust settled from the 1857 revolt, the British Crown basically looked at the wreckage and realized they couldn't trust a trading company with an empire anymore.
No, the era of the merchant ruler died overnight. The Crown had to step in and take direct administrative control.
Right. So they start with the 1858 Act for the Good Government of India, which scraps the old system and creates the Viceroy.
And the Secretary of State, yeah.
Right, right. But what really catches my eye in these sources are the Indian Councils Acts of 1861 and 1892. They introduced this thing called the portfolio system.
Yes.
Now, reading between the lines, that means instead of ruling by a chaotic committee, Indian representatives were finally given specific departments to oversee, like finance or health.
On paper, sure.
But doesn't that show, a genuine attempt to bring Indians into the fold of modern governance?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's more like being invited to the company board meeting, but only being allowed to sit in the corner.
Oh, so just a PR move.
Exactly. It was incredibly calculated. The British realized the 1857 revolt happened largely because they were totally disconnected from Indian sentiment.
Right.
They needed Indians associated with the law to legitimize it, to essentially act as a buffer between the rulers and the ruled.
Ah. So it's less welcome to the team and more, we need a human shield for our policies.
Pretty much. I mean, they allowed Indians into budget discussions by 1892, but they carefully avoided giving up any actual veto power. They refused to even use the word election for the indirect appointments they made.
Wow. But, human shields don't stop a growing freedom struggle.
No, they don't.
So here's where it gets really interesting. By 1909, token representation isn't cutting it, and we get the Morley-Minto reforms. We finally get an Indian on the Viceroy's Executive Council.
That's Sinha.
Right. But the sources highlight a really controversial move here, creating a separate electorate for Muslims. Now, playing devil's advocate for a second, couldn't you argue the British were just trying to protect a minority population in a massive, diverse country?
Well, that was the official defense at the time.
Yeah.
But the historical texts we're looking at firmly synthesize on a much darker reality. By separating voters by religion, it essentially legalized and institutionalized communal division. It wasn't about protection. It was about preventing a unified Indian opposition.
Divide and rule, written in legal ink.
Exactly. Lord Minto literally earned the title Father of the Communal Electorate because this move planted the early seeds for the eventual partition.
Man. And because that didn't stop the protests, the British were forced into even more structural gymnastics 10 years later with the 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford reforms.
Yes, which introduces diarchy in the provinces, basically double rule.
Right, and reading about it, it sounds like a confusing, unworkable mess.
Oh, it was a total failure. It split provincial administration into two. You had transferred subjects like, education or health, run by Indian ministers.
Okay.
But the reserve subjects like police, justice, and land revenue were kept tightly under the British governor's control.
Okay, so it sounds like giving an Indian minister the steering wheel to a car, but the British governor keeps the keys to the gas tank and the engine.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. You give the Indian ministers responsibility for public welfare, but you deny them the actual power or funding to do anything meaningful. It was designed to fail.
And that failure forces the massive overhaul in 1935, right? The Government of India Act.
Yes, the longest act passed by the British Parliament at the time.
Right, and it abolishes that unworkable diarchy in the provinces, finally granting them actual autonomy. But it also creates a federal court and the Reserve Bank of India.
And it splits power into 3 lists: federal, provincial, and concurrent.
Yeah. Now, reading this 1935 Act, it's stunning. It reads almost exactly like the architectural bones of modern India. It's wild that a colonial document essentially became the structural blueprint for a democratic constitution.
What's fascinating here is why they had to do that.
Right.
You have a massive subcontinent violently demanding self-rule. To keep the whole thing from fracturing, the British needed a central financial referee, the RBI, and a legal referee, the federal court. The 3 lists clearly defined who could make laws about what, permanently ending the jurisdictional chaos of diarchy.
Right, but it's crucial to realize, going back to our main mission today, that the British didn't hand over this autonomy out of generosity.
Not at all. Every single structural change, from the 1861 councils to the 1935 autonomy, was a direct response to immense pressure.
The Swadeshi movement, the non-cooperation movement.
Precisely. The broader freedom struggle was forcing their hand at every turn. They were calculated retreats.
Yeah.
And that retreat ultimately hits the wall with the 1947 Independence Act, based on the Mountbatten Plan.
Which created the sovereign dominions of India and Pakistan.
Exactly.
So this entire chain of legal reforms, from the Crown stepping in after 1858 all the way to midnight on August 15, 1947, it wasn't a curriculum designed to teach self-governance.
No, it was a ladder built by the relentless pressure of the Indian people.
Step by step, concession by concession, until the empire simply ran out of steps.
That's exactly it.
Which leaves you, our listener, with a pretty profound thought to mull over. Since the modern Indian constitution borrowed so heavily from that 1935 Government of India Act to structure its democracy, well, how much of the administrative DNA of a scrambling, reluctant colonial empire still quietly governs the daily lives of over 1 billion people today?
This video covers the making of the Indian Constitution, focusing on the Constituent Assembly. We will explore its composition, the election process for its members, and how it operated to draft India's rulebook. The idea for a Constituent Assembly started with M.N. Roy in 1934 and became an official Congress demand in 1935. It was finally accepted in 1946 under the Cabinet Mission Plan. The plan fixed 389 seats, 296 for British India provinces, and 93 for princely states nominated by their rulers. Members from British India were indirectly elected by the provincial assemblies using proportional representation and the single transferable vote system. This led to debate about its representativeness. Critics noted the limited franchise, but defenders pointed to the broad inclusion of communities, regions, and political viewpoints. The first session met on December 9, 1946. Dr. Sachidananda Sinha served as the provisional president, and Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected the permanent president soon after. After partition, the membership dropped to around 299, and the assembly became a sovereign body. It also functioned as both a constituent body and the first legislative body. The process took 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, with 11 sessions held. Key decisions included adopting the national flag on July 22, 1947, and the anthem and song on January 24, 1950, the same day Rajendra Prasad was elected as the first president. To summarize, the Assembly's idea originated with M.N. Roy and was based on the Cabinet Mission Plan. It was indirectly elected and had a dual role. Next, we will cover Nehru's Objectives Resolution, considered the soul of the Constitution, and the major committees and their chairmen. This video delves into the Objectives Resolution, the speech that set the soul of the Constitution and the major committees whose members built its body. Jawaharlal Nehru moved the Objectives Resolution on December 13, 1946, and it was adopted on January 22, 1947. It outlined the aims to guide the drafting process, declaring India an independent sovereign republic, ensuring justice, freedom, equality, integrity, and power flowing from the people. In a modified form, it became the preamble. 8 major committees were formed. Nehru chaired the Union Powers, Union Constitution, and States Committees. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel chaired the Provincial Constitution and the Advisory Committee on Rights. Dr. Rajendra Prasad chaired the Rules of Procedure and Steering Committees. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar led the Crucial Drafting Committee. Patel's Advisory Committee had powerful subcommittees: Fundamental Rights chaired by J.B. Kripalani, Minorities by H.C. Mukherjee, and N.E. Tribal Areas and Assam by Gopinath Bardaloy. A quick recap: Union Powers was Nehru, Provincial Constitution was Patel, Steering was Rajendra Prasad, and Drafting was Ambedkar. There was a debate on whether the committee system was a strength or a weakness. Critics said it slowed the process and concentrated control in a few leaders. Defenders argued it provided division of labor among experts and led to a thorough, consistent document because the leaders commanded national trust. The verdict is that the concentration of talent was both its efficiency and its limitation. In summary, the Objectives Resolution was moved by Nehru on December 13, 1946, adopted on January 22, 1947, and became the preamble. Nehru chaired 3 committees, Patel 2 and Prasad 2. Next, we will discuss the Drafting Committee, its 7 members, and how Dr. Ambedkar became the father of the Constitution. We return to the Constituent Assembly, where the real work begins, turning grand ideals into watertight legal text. For this, on the 29th of August 1947, the Assembly created its most famous body, the Drafting Committee. This compact committee of just 7 members was entrusted with finalizing the Constitution's text. Their mandate was to scrutinize, debate, and reshape the initial draft into its final form. It was truly the workshop where the Constitution was built. The 7 members were chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The other members included N. Gopalaswamy Iyengar, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, Dr. K. M. Munshi, and Syed Mohammad Sadullah. N. Madhava Rao and T. T. Krishnamachari were replacements for other members. The committee didn't start from scratch. Sir B. N. Rao, the constitutional advisor, prepared the initial draft of 243 articles and 13 schedules after studying constitutions worldwide. S. N. Mukherjee, the chief draftsman, rendered the complex ideas into precise legal language. Remember, Rao was the advisor, not a committee member. Why is Dr. Ambedkar called the father of the Constitution if others drafted the initial text? T. T. Krishnamachari explained that due to various reasons like resignation, death, or illness, the entire drafting burden fell on Dr. Ambedkar. He earned the title by carrying the load and defending every clause, often in fragile health. Here's a quick recap. The committee formed on August 29, 1947, with 7 members chaired by Ambedkar. The initial draft was prepared by Sir B. N. Rao. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the father of the Constitution. Next, we will discuss the enactment and enforcement of the Constitution. Welcome to Chapter 2 of Indian Polity, focusing on the making of the Constitution, particularly its enactment, enforcement, and criticism. The Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949, celebrated as Constitution Day, and commenced on January 26, 1950, celebrated as Republic Day. Why the two-date puzzle? The Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949, but deliberately commenced 2 months later. January 26, 1950, was chosen to honor Purna Swaraj Day, the pledge of complete independence declared on January 26, 1930, at the Lahore session of the Congress. Nothing worked between the 2 dates. Several articles concerning citizenship, elections, the Provisional Parliament, and transitional provisions came into force on November 26, 1949. The bulk of the Constitution commenced on January 26, 1950, repealing the Indian Independence Act, 1947, and the Government of India Act, 1935. Here are the numbers to remember. It took 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days to frame the Constitution, with an approximate expenditure of 64 lakh rupees. The original document had 395 articles, 22 parts, and 8 schedules. Although amended, its 1950 architecture remains. Critics charged it was a borrowed constitution, a carbon copy of the 1935 Act, or too lengthy. However, the defense highlighted that borrowing was selective and adapted to Indian conditions. The length reflects India's diversity, and its resilience over 75 years vindicates the framers' choices. To lock in the key facts, adopted on November 26, 1949, and commenced on January 26, 1950, honoring Purna Swaraj Day. K. Hanumantaya made the English ban jibe. The Indian Independence Act 1947 and Goa Act 1935 were repealed. Next, we will cover the sources of the Constitution. Welcome to Chapter 2.5, Sources of the Constitution. Previously, we noted that the framers were like tailors, picking the finest cloth from many bazaars. Today, we will identify every source they visited and the features they brought back to construct the Indian Constitution. The largest single source for the Constitution is the Government of India Act of 1935, which accounts for about 2/3 of the text. It provided us with the federal scheme, the office of the governor, the judiciary, and emergency provisions, among others. The Constitution borrowed features from numerous countries. Key sources include Britain for the parliamentary system and rule of law, the U.S. for fundamental rights and judicial review, and Ireland for directive principles and the election of the president. Memorizing these pairs is crucial. Be careful not to confuse fundamental rights from the USA with fundamental duties from the USSR. Also, DPSP is from Ireland, and the concurrent list is from Australia. The suspension of fundamental rights in an emergency is from Germany, while quote, procedure established by law is from Japan. Dr. Ambedkar rightly argued that there is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing, as no one holds a patent on constitutional ideas. The genius of our framers was in selecting and adapting these threads to the Indian context, creating a successful patchwork that has endured for over 75 years. To summarize the 5 key sources, the largest is the Government of India Act 1935, the DPSP is from Ireland, the concurrent list is from Australia, fundamental duties are from the USSR, and the strong center is from Canada. This concludes Chapter 2. Next we will cover Chapter 3, the concept of a constitution. We have covered how India's constitution was made and where its ideas came from. This video answers the question, what is a constitution anyway? A constitution is the supreme law, the rule book of a nation. It establishes the government organs, defines and distributes their powers, limits those powers, and guarantees citizens' rights. India's constitution is both written as a single drafted document and enacted, consciously framed at a point in time. The UK is considered uncodified, not truly unwritten, and evolved over time. India's constitution is neither purely rigid like the USA, nor flexible like the UK, but a blend of both. It employs simple majority, and special majority plus state ratification for amendments. India sits at the extremes of being written and enacted. However, it takes a middle path on the rigid versus flexible scale, providing stability and adaptability. To summarize key points, a constitution is the supreme law. The UK's is uncodified. India's is a blend of rigid and flexible, and it was enacted. The USA provides a purely rigid example. Next, we will discuss constitutionalism. Last time, we defined what a constitution is. Today, we address a deeper question. Is merely having a constitution the same as being governed by one? Historically, the answer is no. Constitutionalism is the doctrine of limited government. Those who hold power must be restrained by it. The Constitution is the text on paper, but constitutionalism is when that text actually binds the powerful, meaning no one is above the law. A constitution without constitutionalism is a cage with the door left open. The document exists, but the restraint does not. For example, the USSR's 1936 Constitution promised magnificent freedoms, but the reality was the opposite. Text is cheap, but restraint is costly. What makes a constitution truly constitutional? The checklist includes the rule of law, separation of powers, an independent judiciary, fundamental rights, judicial review, and free and fair elections. These elements ensure accountable government, without which the Constitution is mere decoration. Constitutionalism can be viewed as negative, focusing on limits and, quote, thou shalt nots, or positive, imposing a duty on the state to act for justice and welfare, as reflected in India's DPSP. India embraces both. Power is restrained and directed to good ends. To summarize, constitutionalism is the doctrine of limited government, protected by the basic structure. The key phrase is constitution without constitutionalism. Remember, the Constitution is the text. Constitutionalism is the discipline that binds. This concludes Chapter 3. Next we will cover Chapter 4, Salient Features of the Constitution. Last time we discussed what a constitution is. Now let's explore what makes the Indian Constitution distinctive. Welcome to the salient features, which define the personality of our Constitution. India has the world's lengthiest written constitution, drawn from many sources and adapted for India's needs. Key influences include the parliamentary system and rule of law from Britain, fundamental rights from the USA, and directive principles from Ireland. The Indian Constitution is federal in form, with 2 levels of government and a division of powers. Yet, it is unitary in spirit, featuring a strong center, single citizenship, and sweeping emergency powers. This makes it quasi-federal, as Article 1 calls India a, quote, union of states. Other features include a parliamentary government where the executive is accountable to the legislature, and an integrated, independent judiciary with the Supreme Court at the apex. It also includes the important trio of fundamental rights, directive principles, and fundamental duties. Critics call the Constitution a carbon copy and a lawyer's paradise due to its length and dense legal language. However, the defense, led by Ambedkar, argued that borrowing was necessary and adapted to Indian needs. It has worked, holding a diverse democracy together for over 70 years. The key takeaways are its length, the blend of sources, its quasi-federal nature, and the inclusion of fundamental rights, principles, and duties. Next, we will explore the preamble.
How is it even possible that the most famous sentence in Indian history, like the very soul of the Constitution, wasn't legally considered part of the document until 1973?
Right. I mean, it sounds impossible, especially for something that, literally sets up the entire framework of the country.
Yeah.
But that contradiction is exactly why we're digging into this today.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. If you're listening to this, you're likely grinding through your competitive exam prep.
Yeah, definitely.
So today we're taking your study notes on Chapter 5 of Indian Polity and turning them into a massive advantage. Our mission is to decode the preamble. I mean, the famous jurist N.A. Pakhavala called it the identity card of the Constitution.
Which is such a great phrase. It really is the ultimate proof of what the nation's supposed to be.
Hmm.
And the origins of that identity, they're very deliberate.
How so?
Well, it's essentially one long, luminous sentence, distilled directly from Jawaharlal Nehru's original objectives resolution. And it kicks off with those 5 massive words, "We, the people of India."
Right, which isn't just poetry.
No, not at all. It legally proves that the ultimate authority doesn't come from, say, a British monarch or even the parliament.
It comes directly from the citizens.
Exactly, the citizens who adopted it on November 26, 1949.
Okay, so it sets up this core framework. It defines the state with words like sovereign, democratic, and a republic.
Yep.
And it promises objectives to the citizens, like justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. But wait, okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
If this is the ultimate fixed identity card from 1949, were all these words shipped in the original version, or did this document get, like, a software update later?
What's fascinating here is that exact tension. I mean, that's where so many students lose marks on exam day.
Really? It's a trap.
A huge trap. It's so easy to assume the preamble we read today is the pristine 1949 original, but the reality is that 3 huge words, socialist, secular, and integrity, they were completely absent at the start.
Wow, completely absent.
Yeah. They were inserted later, during the 1976 emergency era under the 42nd Amendment.
Okay, so if Parliament can just vote to insert massive concepts like secular or socialist into the preamble, it kind of implies it's subject to the same amendment rules as the rest of the Constitution, right?
You would think so, yeah.
But wasn't there a huge debate over whether it's even a real part of the Constitution to begin with?
Oh, a massive debate. We're talking about a historic judicial power struggle here.
Yeah.
Back in 1960, in the Brew-Bar Union case,
Okay.
the Supreme Court basically ruled that the preamble was just a preface, like a key to the maker's mind, sure, but not officially an enforceable part of the Constitution.
So it was legally just decoration.
Essentially, yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because you mentioned 1973 earlier. What forced the Supreme Court to totally change its mind 13 years later?
The sheer danger of absolute political power. By 1973, in that landmark Kesavanda Bharati case, the court realized they had a massive problem on their hands.
Because of Article 368.
Exactly. Under Article 368, Parliament has the power to amend the law. But if the preamble isn't legally part of the Constitution, what's stopping a temporary political majority from just, using 368 to legally vote away democracy itself?
Oh, wow. That's terrifying.
Right. So to protect the nation's core principles, the court completely reversed its 1960 stance. They ruled that, yes, the preamble absolutely is part of the Constitution.
But wait, if the Supreme Court decides it is officially part of the document, doesn't that immediately put a target on its back?
How do you mean?
Well, if Article 368 allows for amendments, can Parliament just rewrite the entire preamble and change the nation's identity whenever they want?
So they can amend it, yeah, but they cannot destroy it.
Oh, okay.
This is the absolute brilliance of the case of Ananda Bharati ruling. The court created the basic structure doctrine.
The basic structure.
Yeah. Think of it as the Constitution's DNA. Parliament can use Article 368 to change the Constitution's clothes or give it a new haircut, like adding socialist and secular through the 42nd Amendment.
Right, the software update.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they cannot mutate its fundamental DNA. You just cannot gut the core soul of the republic.
That completely reframes how to look at this for an exam. So what does this all mean for your revision strategy?
Good question.
Focus on that power struggle over the nation's identity. You need to lock in the fact that the 42nd Amendment added the trio socialist, secular, and integrity.
Yes, definitely remember those three.
Right, and understand why the court in Kesavananda ruled the preamble is part of the Constitution. It was specifically to protect its basic structure from being destroyed by Article 368.
Spot on.
And remember, judges use this exact document as their primary lens when interpreting any other ambiguous law.
Exactly. And, you know, if we look at that primary lens, it leaves you with this fascinating built-in tension.
What kind of tension?
Well, the preamble promises absolute individual liberty, right? But it also demands fraternity to maintain national unity.
Oh, I see.
So if you're structuring a long-form essay answer, ask yourself this. What happens when those massive promises inevitably collide?
Because they have to, right?
Well, they do. Can you ever truly enforce total individual liberty without eventually fracturing the fraternity of the whole nation?
Wow, that's a tough one.
It is. It's a delicate balance the courts are, frankly, still wrestling with today. Keep that in the back of your mind as you study. So if you look at a map of India, those bold lines separating the states, they look totally permanent, right? Like they're carved in stone.
Yeah, they definitely do.
But constitutionally speaking, they're actually written in pencil. And the center holds, well, a really massive eraser. If you are a student staring down competitive exams right now, mastering this concept is absolutely critical.
And right, it's a huge topic for exams.
Exactly. Understanding the constitutional definition of India, specifically Articles 1 through 4, our mission for this deep dive is to basically explore the Constitution's quiet power to just, redraw the map.
It's a great mission. We tend to treat geography as this fixed reality.
Yeah.
But the internal map of India is it's incredibly fluid by design.
Okay, let's unpack this,
Okay.
starting right with Article 1, which says, India, that is Virat, shall be a union of states.
Right.
Now, when I hear the word union, I immediately think of, like, a corporate merger. A bunch of independent companies teaming up.
Sure, like a partnership.
Yeah. But if the deal goes sour, can these states just take their assets and back out?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it is absolutely not an agreement. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was very specific about this during the drafting process.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he deliberately chose the phrase union of states over federation just to emphasize that the states didn't come together to form some kind of pact.
So they didn't sign up for it like a treaty?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because there's no initial agreement, they have zero right to secede. In Ambedkar's own words, the union is one indestructible whole.
Okay, got it. So the outer boundary is locked tight.
Completely locked.
But if states are trapped inside this indestructible whole, what exactly are we looking at on the map? Because, there's a classic trap here for competitive exams.
Oh, the union versus territory question?
Yes, that one. How does that work again?
Right, so it's a bit of a mathematical trap. Basically, the territory of India is a much larger umbrella concept than the Union of India.
Okay, so they aren't interchangeable terms.
Not at all. The union refers exclusively to the states, but the territory, that includes the states, the union territories, and, critically, any foreign land India might acquire in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. So the states are locked in the union. But if they have no power to leave, what stops the center from just, gerrymandering them out of existence?
Well, under Article 3, the center actually can do a lot.
Right, because Article 3 says a state's view on its own boundaries is sought, but it's not binding. Wait, doesn't that completely undermine federalism?
It's definitely a strong centralized power.
Like the center could just chop a state in half against its will.
Yes. And it only takes a simple, everyday vote in Parliament. The center can alter a state's area, its boundaries, or even its name.
Wow. Without any massive constitutional overhaul.
Exactly. And on top of that, Article 4 explicitly says these internal changes are not considered constitutional amendments under Article 368.
Okay, so changing the map internally is, surprisingly easy.
Very easy.
But what about external borders? Can the center just hand over a piece of a state to another country with that same simple majority?
Oh, not at all. That is the strict limit right there.
So giving land away is different.
Completely different. Ceding territory absolutely requires an Article 368 amendment, meaning you need this grueling special majority with 2/3 of Parliament agreeing, not just your everyday vote.
Right, the stakes are way higher.
Right. The Supreme Court actually settled this back in the 1960 Brubari case, and we thought the actual mechanism in action more recently.
With the India-Bangladesh land swap, right, in 2015.
Spot on. That required the 100th Amendment.
Okay, so it's incredibly hard to give land away to a foreign power, but shifting it around internally is basically just a simple vote.
Yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Which really makes me wonder, how has this massive internal redrawing power actually been used since 1947? What was driving the center to use that eraser so much?
Well, initially it started with massive linguistic pressures.
Like people wanting states based on the language they speak.
Exactly. In 1953, there was the famous fast of Padisriamulu, which essentially forced the creation of Andhra.
And that was the very first state based entirely on language.
It was. And that momentum just triggered this Sweeping States Reorganization Act in 1956, which completely reshaped the map along linguistic lines.
But over time, the pressures kind of shifted from language to administration, didn't they?
It did, yeah.
Because governing a massive state is just a logistical nightmare. I mean, that explains the year 2000 when the center carved out that trio Uttarakhand, Arkhand, and Chhattisgarh.
Right.
That was strictly for better governance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The mechanism adapted to new political realities. And then most recently, Telangana became the 29th state in 2014 following, well, decades of regional demands.
Which brings us to today.
Right. All of this shifting, merging, and dividing leaves us with our current map tally, which is 28 states and 8 union territories.
Okay, let's quickly summarize the high-yield takeaways for you as you prep for your exams.
Good idea.
First, India is an indestructible union. Second, the center does not need a state's binding consent to redraw internal borders. That just takes a simple vote.
Yeah.
But third, ceding land externally demands a rigorous Article 368 amendment.
That's perfectly summarized. Essentially, external borders are in ink and internal ones are in pencil.
I love that. Which leaves you with something pretty fascinating to consider. If the center can completely alter a state's area, its boundary, or even its name without its binding consent, without its binding consent, how much permanent identity does any single state truly hold within the union? Something to mull over as you hit the books. Like waking up to find out the fundamental rules of who actually belongs in your country just completely changed overnight.
Yeah, that's a wild thought.
Right. But for India in 1950, and again in 2019, that wasn't some hypothetical scenario. It was a reality. So today we're doing a deep dive into Indian polity, specifically Chapter 7 on citizenship.
Which is such a crucial topic if you're prepping for your competitive exams.
Exactly. Our mission today is to distill those presentation slides you sent us. The constitutional mechanics, the specific acts, and the big debates.
Yeah.
We want to give you conceptual clarity so you avoid those common logical traps on the exam. So, okay, let's unpack this because citizenship seems really simple until you actually look at the law.
It really does. I mean, at first glance, you think, well, you're either in the club or you're out, right? But the actual mechanics defining that club are, frankly, incredibly complex.
So to understand those mechanics, I think we have to start with the Constitution itself. Like Articles 5 through 8 basically just dealt with the immediate aftermath of independence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They were just sorting out who was a citizen right on commencement day, January 26, 1950, and handling that massive migration from partition. It really feels like they were just pouring the concrete foundation for the people standing there at that exact moment.
That's a great way to look at it. The framers didn't try to build the whole house right then and there. Instead, they wrote Article 11.
Oh, right. The powerhouse.
Exactly. Article 11 acts as this, basically a blank architectural blueprint. It gives Parliament the sweeping power to regulate citizenship by law going forward.
Okay, so the Constitution is really just the base starter kit. Yeah. But Parliament's Citizenship Act of 1955, that's the massive expansion pack that has all the actual rules for how the system works today.
Yes, the expansion pack. And for your exam, that 1955 Act is the absolute mechanical core. You really need to know it dictates the famous 5/3 rule.
The 5 ways to get it and 3 ways to lose it.
Right. So there are 5 ways to acquire citizenship. You've got birth, descent, registration, naturalization, and incorporation of territory. And then 3 ways to lose it: renunciation, termination, and deprivation.
Okay, let's not just list those out, because I know students get tripped up there.
Yeah.
How do those three losing conditions actually work in practice?
Well, think of it like this. Renunciation is, you voluntarily quitting the club. You're walking away. Termination is the club kicking you out automatically because you joined a rival club.
Oh, wow. And deprivation.
Deprivation is the club forcibly revoking your membership. Like, say you lied on your original application or committed fraud, they just strip it from you.
Wait, that second one, the automatic kick out for joining another club, that brings up a massive conceptual hurdle because, in the U.S., you have this state and nation dual model or people walking around with passports from two different countries.
Right. Dual citizenship is super common globally.
But Article 9 of the Indian Constitution makes it basically impossible to hold dual loyalty, right? Like you take a foreign citizenship and your Indian one is just instantly terminated.
Instantly. India strictly enforces a single citizenship rule. There is only one common citizenship for the entire country.
Wait, but if Article 9 makes dual citizenship impossible, how do we explain the, millions of people holding OCI cards, the overseas citizen of India status? I see students fall into this trap all the time on practice tests, assuming it's dual citizenship because, well, the word citizen is literally in the name.
I know, it's so confusing, and what's fascinating here is how the terminology fundamentally misleads people. When you are sitting in that exam room, please do not let the word citizenship in OCI fool you.
It's a total trick question.
It is. The examiners are testing whether you know that India fundamentally rejects dual loyalty. OCI is just an ongoing privilege. It is completely devoid of actual constitutional citizenship rights.
So it's basically a lifelong VIP visa, but one with really strict boundaries. You get certain perks, but you have no voting rights. You are entirely ineligible for constitutional offices, and you can't even buy agricultural land.
Exactly. And in 2015, the government actually merged the older PIO scheme, Persons of Indian Origin, into the OCI scheme. That move further solidified that OCI is purely a regulatory framework, not a constitutional status.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we take that massive blank blueprint power Parliament has under Article 11 to write the rules, and we apply it to modern times, we get a huge topic, the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. The CAA.
Yeah, the CAA. This is where Parliament used its Article 11 powers to fundamentally amend that 1955 expansion pact. The CAA basically creates a faster path and naturalization for undocumented migrants from 6 specific communities.
Let me guess. Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, and Christian, right?
Spot on. And it specifically applies to migrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan who entered India on or before December 31st, 2014.
So what does this all actually mean for your exam prep? Because there is so much political noise around this. We really have to strip that away and just look strictly at the impartial constitutional tension here.
Definitely. If you look at the supporters of the CAA, they argue the mechanism acts as a much-needed humanitarian refuge. They point out it's specifically designed to protect religious minorities who are fleeing systemic persecution in those 3 neighboring countries.
Right. But wait, if the goal is purely humanitarian refuge, why are critics saying it violates the Constitution? Like, what's the actual legal friction happening there?
Well, the critics argue that using religion as a filter for citizenship sits really uneasily with Article 14.
The absolute guarantee of equality before the law.
Exactly. Because certain groups are excluded from this fast track, the argument is that the religion-based criteria violate that fundamental right to equality.
Oh, man. Here's where it gets really interesting for the exam. The entire Supreme Court challenge, and literally the core of the academic debate you'll be tested on, hinges entirely on this specific clash with Article 14.
Yes. So connecting this to the bigger picture for the exam, you definitely have to know the mechanics of the act. The 6 communities, the 3 countries, the cutoff date. But your high-scoring answers will depend on you understanding that underlying constitutional tension.
All right, let's lock this in for everyone listening. First, make sure you understand the mechanisms of the 1955 Act's 5 acquire and 3 lose rule. Second, remember that Article 9 enforces strict single citizenship seriously. Do not let the OCI terminology trap you. And finally, know that the CAA debate is fundamentally a question of Article 14's right to equality.
Which actually raises a really important question for your studies.
It totally does. Think back to that foundational blueprint we talked about at the start. If Article 11 gives Parliament these sweeping, almost limitless powers to write the rules of citizenship, but Article 14 guarantees absolute equality to everyone, where exactly is the line drawn between parliamentary power and constitutional limits?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. Good luck on your exams, everyone, and keep questioning the rules of the game. Imagine the government passes a law tomorrow that effectively deletes your right to free speech.
That sounds like a total nightmare scenario.
Right. But the crazy thing is, you wouldn't even need to protest or, like, petition your local representative. Because of this hidden mechanism in the Constitution, that law is actually just dead the moment it's signed.
Yeah, it's basically a built-in self-defense system. And, welcome to today's deep dive. When you are prepping for a competitive exam, the Constitution usually just looks like this impenetrable wall of text.
Oh, absolutely. It's so overwhelming.
It really is. But Part 3, so that's Articles 12 to 35, the fundamental rights, that's the actual code that prevents tyranny.
And our mission today is handing you the blueprint to that exact code. Because understanding how these rights operate, knowing that they are justiciable.
Meaning you can actually drag the state directly to court if they're violated?
Exactly. Knowing that is what actually helps you dominate the polity section of your exam. So where do we start?
Well, to use that self-defense system, you first have to know who you're defending against, right? And that's Article 12.
Okay.
It defines the state. And it's not just the central government, but legislatures, local authorities.
Basically any entity wielding governmental power.
Right. You nailed it. Any of them. So if Article 12 defines the giant we're fighting, then Article 13 is the weapon.
Okay, let's unpack this. Is Article 13 essentially like a constitutional bouncer, just instantly tossing out any legislation that disrespects our rights?
That is a perfect way to put it. It doesn't just block unconstitutional laws.
Yeah.
It retroactively vaporizes them. It is the absolute bedrock of judicial review in India.
Wow.
Yeah. Article 13 empowers the courts to look at any legislation, and if it crosses the line, the court renders it legally void.
But, I mean, what exactly is the line? Because we're looking at 16 complex articles in there, right? 14 through 30.
Yeah, it's a big chunk.
And memorizing that block is just brutal for students. I always wondered, should you view this not as a random list, but maybe as like a progressive hierarchy of human needs?
Oh, I love that approach. Because looking at the mechanics, it absolutely is a progression. I mean, you can't meaningfully practice your religion or protect your culture.
Which are covered later, right? In Articles 25 through 30.
Right, exactly. You can't do those things if you don't first have basic bodily liberty and equality before the law.
Which are the foundational pillars.
Yeah, in Articles 14 through 22, you need equality and freedom just to exist in society.
Right, before you can even worry about rights against exploitation or, like, cultural expression, it literally builds on itself.
It does, and the mechanism holding that entire structure together is Article 32.
The heart and soul of the Constitution.
Exactly. It provides the actual constitutional remedies through 5 specific writs. And think of a writ not as a suggestion, but like a constitutional override code.
Okay, so give me an example.
So if lower court steps out of bounds, a writ like prohibition acts as an emergency brake. Or habeas corpus, which literally forces the state to justify a physical detention.
Wait, hold on. If Article 32 is this supreme override code for fundamental rights, what happens if the state violates a normal, everyday legal right? Am I just out of luck?
Well, not quite. And this is where the high courts come in, under Article 226.
Okay.
See, while the Supreme Court under Article 32 is strictly for fundamental rights, high courts can issue writs for fundamental and ordinary legal rights.
Wait, really? Here's where it gets really interesting. So technically, a high court's writ jurisdiction is actually wider than the Supreme Court's.
Yes, it is.
That feels like a massive trick question for an exam.
Oh, it traps thousands of students every single year. You have to watch out for that.
What's another big trap students fall into?
Definitely assuming these rights paralyze the government no matter what. Like, what happens if the country is at war?
I assume the Constitution accounts for that, right?
It does. These rights are not absolute. They carry reasonable restrictions, and crucially, most can be suspended during a national emergency.
Which, I mean, makes sense. The survival of the nation has to trump individual rights in a massive crisis. But what about the right to property? Because I know it used to be a fundamental right, but now it's just gone.
Ah, the famous missing 7th right.
Yeah.
The 44th Amendment in 1978 didn't actually destroy it, it just relocated it. It was removed from Part 3 entirely and placed under Article 300A.
So what does this actually mean for a citizen? It basically lost its constitutional armor.
Essentially.
So instead of going straight to the Supreme Court's emergency lane under Article 32, property disputes now have to wait in everyday legal traffic.
Exactly right. It was demoted to a standard legal right. You obviously still have it, but the enforcement mechanism is completely different now.
Wow. You know, when you look at this ecosystem as a whole, Mastering the gatekeepers in 12 and 13, visualizing the pillars as a hierarchy of needs.
And understanding the override codes of the writs.
Right, and mapping out the exceptions. You aren't just memorizing articles anymore. You're really decoding the mechanics of citizen power.
You're deeply understanding the foundational relationship between the individual and the state. That's the real secret to crushing your exam.
Speaking of that relationship, I want to leave you with one thought to chew on as you hit the books today. We've talked a lot about this incredible constitutional armor protecting you from the state.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
But if the state holds the ultimate power to declare an emergency and just, like, strip that armor away when things get tough, whose armor is it really? Think about it.
We have looked at the rights the state must not violate. Now let's explore the goals the state must strive toward, the directive principles of state policy, contained in Part 4, Articles 36 to 51, which act as the compass of the Republic. The directives are instructions for the government, borrowed from Ireland. Article 37 states they are non-justiciable, meaning they are not enforceable in court. However, they are considered fundamental in the governance of the country and aim to establish a welfare state, promoting social and economic democracy. The directives are grouped into three families. Socialistic principles focus on social justice and welfare, including livelihood, equal pay, and fair distribution of wealth. Gandhian principles include village panchayats, cottage industries, and the upliftment of weaker sections. Liberal intellectual principles cover areas like the Uniform Civil Code, environment protection, and the separation of the judiciary. Key articles to remember include Article 40 on village panchayats and Article 44 on the Uniform Civil Code. Article 47 addresses nutrition and prohibition, while Article 48A focuses on environment protection. Article 50 separates the judiciary from the executive, and Article 51 promotes international peace and security. Directives have been added through amendments such as the 42nd, 44th, and 97th, focusing on areas like free legal aid, minimizing income inequality, and promoting cooperatives. Despite being non-justiciable, many directives have been realized through legislation, including the 73rd Amendment for panchayats and the right to education. The relationship between fundamental rights and directive principles has seen judicial interpretation. The Minerva Mills case established them as complementary, the two wheels of the same chariot. This balance is considered part of the basic structure of the Constitution, emphasizing harmony over hierarchy. In summary, the directives are non-justiciable but fundamental, categorized into socialistic, Gandhian, and liberal intellectual principles. They have been expanded by amendments and maintain a critical balance with fundamental rights. The directives represent the conscience and compass of the Republic. We have covered fundamental rights and directive principles. This video introduces the third strand of citizenship, fundamental duties. We ask, what does the citizen owe the nation in return? Meet the fundamental duties, located in Part 4A, Article 51A of the Constitution. The fundamental duties were not in the original 1950 Constitution, but were added in 1976 by the 42nd Amendment, based on the Swaran Singh Committee's advice and inspired by the USSR's model. They bind only citizens and are non-justiciable, meaning there is no automatic court enforcement. The first 6 duties focus on the nation and society. They include respecting the Republic, cherishing freedom struggle ideals, upholding unity and integrity, defending the nation, promoting harmony and dignity, and preserving our composite culture. The remaining 5 duties cover the environment, self, and future. They are protecting the environment, developing scientific temper, safeguarding public property, striving for excellence, and the 11th duty added in 2002 to educate the child between 6 and 14 years. Fundamental duties are a blend of moral and civic obligations, codifying the Indian way of life. While non-justiciable, Parliament can legislate to enforce specific duties, such as the National Honor Act. Courts also use them to test the reasonableness of laws, as highlighted by the Justice Verma Committee in 1999. Critics argue the duties are not exhaustive, contain vague terms, and lack legal enforceability. However, they are vital, as rights and duties are correlative. They also serve as a warning against antisocial conduct and a yardstick for courts. The debate continues on making these duties fully enforceable. To summarize, duties are in Part 4A, Article 51A, added by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. There are 11 duties binding on citizens and are non-justiciable. Rights are claims, directives are goals, and duties are obligations, completing the moral architecture of the Republic. Welcome to Chapter 11 on the Amendment of the Constitution, aptly titled Bending Without Breaking. We explore Article 368 and how this living document adapts to changing times. Article 368, in Part 20, outlines the power and procedure to amend, striking a balance between rigidity and flexibility. There are three types of amendments, and importantly, the basic structure cannot be destroyed, as affirmed in case of Ananda Bharati. The three types of amendment are simple majority for matters outside, Article 368, special majority for most of the Constitution, and special majority plus state ratification for federal provisions. The procedure requires a bill in either House of Parliament, introduced by a minister or private member, passed by special majority in each House. No joint sitting is permitted. State ratification is needed for federal provisions, and since the 24th Amendment, the President must assent. Critics point to the lack of a separate constituent body and the similarity to ordinary lawmaking. However, the three-tier route and the basic structure doctrine safeguard the core. The 24th Amendment affirmed Parliament's power to amend any part and made the President's assent mandatory. India's approach is the middle path compared to the very rigid U.S. Constitution and the flexible, unwritten U.K. Constitution. India uses simple, special, or special, plus state ratification, based on the subject matter. In summary, Article 368 establishes a balance, with three amendment types and the basic structure doctrine as the ultimate limit. This ensures the Constitution remains a living document that can adapt without losing its essence. This video, Chapter 12 on Indian Polity, discusses the basic structure of the Constitution and the doctrine that limits Parliament's amending power under Article 368. The core idea of the basic structure is that Parliament can amend the Constitution but cannot destroy its essential identity. This concept is judicially evolved and grants amending power under Article 368 but limits it by constitutional essentials. The key phrase to remember is amend, but do not annihilate. The doctrine evolved from Shankari Prasad in 1951, which allowed Parliament to amend fundamental rights to Golak Nath in 1967, which barred Parliament from amending them. The 24th, 25th, and 29th Amendments asserted wide amending power. Finally, in case of Ananda in 1973, the doctrine established that any part may be amended, but the basic structure cannot be destroyed. Case of Ananda Bharati was a turning point, decided by the largest bench with a 7-6 narrow majority. It struck a golden middle path, confirming Parliament can amend any provision, including fundamental rights, but cannot alter the basic structure or essential features of the Constitution. This is judicial review preserving constitutional identity. The courts have protected several elements as part of the basic structure. These include constitutional supremacy, democracy and republic, secularism and equality, federalism, separation of powers, and judicial review. Subsequent cases have elaborated on the basic structure. Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narain protected free and fair elections, equality, rule of law, and judicial review. Minerva Mills protected limited amending power and the balance between fundamental rights and DPSP. S.R. Bomai strengthened secularism and federalism. I.R. Coelho allowed testing of Ninth Schedule laws if they damaged the basic structure. The significance of the basic structure doctrine lies in limiting power, protecting minorities, and balancing change with continuity. It is not anti-democratic but a safeguard that ensures democracy remains constitutional. The doctrine prompts a debate, judicial review or overreach. Critics point to unelected judges invalidating amendments and the fluid nature of basic features. Defenders argue it prevents the destruction of democracy and allows flexibility. The balanced answer views it as a counter-majoritarian check designed to preserve the constitutional framework. For a quick recall, the doctrine relates to Article 368, was born in Kesavananda Bharati in 1973 with a 13-judge, 7-6 majority, and its key phrase is basic structure or essential features. It was applied in the Indira Gandhi case and strengthened in Minerva Mills. Remember that there is no exhaustive constitutional list of basic features. The main takeaways are that amending power is wide but not unlimited, the basic structure is judicially evolved, and Kesavananda allows amendment but not destruction of identity. Minerva Mills cemented limited amending power as basic. Core elements include free elections, judicial review, secularism, federalism, and the rule of law. The memory line is, amend, but do not annihilate.